My name is Dorothy Whitmore. I'm 68 years old, and I learned that sometimes the people you trust most are the ones who need the hardest lessons about loyalty. When my son Jameson looked me in the eye and said, "I sold everything you own," he thought he was taking control of a helpless old woman. What he didn't know was that he had just declared war on someone who had been fighting battles since before he was born. Hold up. I'm curious where you're listening from, and if this story spoke to you, make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, what I have planned for tomorrow is going to blow you away. For 43 years, I lived in the same Victorian house on Elmwood Avenue in Ridgemont Falls. The blue shutters I painted myself every spring, the rose garden I tended through countless seasons, the wraparound porch where I watched my children take their first steps. This wasn't just a house. It was the fortress I built after my husband died when Jameson was only 12. After Harold's passing, I could have crumbled. I could have sold everything and moved somewhere smaller, somewhere easier. Instead, I rolled up my sleeves and turned our antique restoration business into something that put Jameson through college, bought him his first car, and gave him every opportunity I never had. The irony wasn't lost on me that my expertise was in bringing old, forgotten things back to their former glory. Mahogany armoires that families had abandoned, grandfather clocks that had stopped ticking, oil paintings darkened by decades of neglect. I could see their potential when others saw only junk. I suppose I should have been better at recognizing when something precious in my own life was being slowly damaged beyond repair. Jameson had always been different from his sister Penelope. Where she called every Sunday without fail, sent thoughtful birthday cards, and visited during holidays with her children, Jameson's contact came in waves. Months of silence, followed by sudden, urgent phone calls about business opportunities, investment schemes, or temporary financial emergencies. "Mom, you're sitting on a gold mine with that house. The property values in Ridgemont Falls have skyrocketed. You could sell and live comfortably in a nice little condo in Sunrise Gardens." I'd laugh it off, explaining that I wasn't ready to downsize, that the house held too many memories, that my antique business needed the space. But Jameson's suggestions became more persistent, more pointed. He started visiting unannounced with real estate agents, claiming he was just exploring options for my future comfort. The first red flag should have been when I caught him taking photos of my most valuable pieces, the 1847 Steinway piano that had been Harold's grandmother's pride and joy, the Tiffany lamp collection I'd spent 20 years curating, the Civil War-era writing desk that 3 museums had tried to purchase. "Just documenting everything for insurance purposes," he explained smoothly when I questioned him. "You should have better records of what you own, especially at your age." At my age. Those 3 words stung more than he realized. To Jameson, I had apparently crossed some invisible threshold where my competence was now questionable, where my decisions needed oversight, where my independence was more burden than blessing. The second red flag should have been when I caught him bringing his girlfriend Cassandra to our family gatherings. Not because she was unwelcome, she seemed pleasant enough, but because of the way she evaluated everything. Her eyes would linger on antiques, her fingers would trace the edges of valuable frames, and she'd ask seemingly innocent questions about provenance and worth. "Your mother has exquisite taste," she'd tell Jameson within my earshot. "These pieces belong in a museum. It's almost selfish to keep them locked away in a house where no one can appreciate them." The third red flag was when Jameson suggested I might be developing memory problems. It started small, claiming I'd forgotten conversations we'd never had, insisting I'd agreed to things I would never approve. When I challenged him, he'd exchange meaningful glances with Cassandra and speak in that patronizing tone people reserve for confused elderly relatives. "Mom, we talked about this last week. You said you were feeling overwhelmed managing everything alone. You said you trusted me to help make decisions." But I remembered every conversation, every detail, every moment of our interactions with crystal clarity.
My mind was as sharp as the day I'd negotiated my first major antique acquisition. If anything, 68 years of experience had honed my ability to read people, to spot deception, to recognize when someone was trying to manipulate me. The final red flag should have prepared me for what was coming, but even I underestimated how far he was willing to go. Jameson arrived one Tuesday morning with a folder full of legal documents. Power of attorney forms, property transfer papers, and a stack of contracts that he spread across my kitchen table like a salesman displaying his wares. "I've been working with an attorney to streamline your affairs," he announced, his voice carrying that false cheerfulness that people use when they're about to deliver bad news. "Given your age and the complexity of managing all of these assets, it makes sense to simplify things now before they become too difficult for you to handle."
I stared at the papers, recognizing immediately what they represented. Not simplification, consolidation, not assistance, appropriation. These documents would transfer ownership of my house, my business, and my personal property into Jameson's name, ostensibly for my own protection and convenience. "You want me to sign away everything I've worked for?" I said quietly, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "I want to protect you," he replied, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. "And protect what Dad built. You can't manage all this forever. And when something happens to you, the estate taxes alone will destroy everything. This way, we preserve the family legacy." Family legacy. The phrase tasted bitter in my mouth. What legacy was there in a son who saw his mother as an obstacle to his inheritance, rather than the person who had sacrificed everything to build that inheritance in the first place? I looked at those papers for a long moment, then back at my son. At 41 years old, Jameson had never built anything lasting. He'd bounced between jobs, failed at 3 different business ventures I had funded, and consistently demonstrated that his solution to every problem was to find someone else to solve it for him. And now he wanted me to hand over the results of 4 decades of hard work because he had decided I was no longer capable of managing my own life. I folded the papers carefully and handed them back to him. "I need time to think about this." "Of course," he said, but I could see the frustration in his eyes. "Just don't take too long. These opportunities don't last forever." Opportunities? As if my home and my life's work were opportunities for him to seize, rather than treasures for me to protect. That night, I sat in Harold's old chair in my study, surrounded by the antiques that told the story of our life together. Each piece had been carefully chosen, lovingly restored, and thoughtfully placed. This wasn't just a collection, it was a legacy built through knowledge, passion, and decades of careful stewardship. I realized then that Jameson didn't see any of that. He saw dollar signs and liquidation potential. He saw an elderly woman who was inconveniently attached to things that could be converted to cash. He saw obstacles to his financial future, rather than the foundation his father and I had built for his security. But what Jameson didn't see, what he had never bothered to learn about me, was that I hadn't spent 43 years in the antique business without learning how to spot a fake, how to recognize real value, and how to protect what matters most. The next morning, I woke up knowing exactly what I needed to do. Not what Jameson wanted me to do, not what would be easiest, but what would teach him the most important lesson of his life about trust, respect, and the consequences of taking advantage of the people who love you most. He thought he was dealing with a helpless old woman who could be manipulated into signing away her life's work. He was about to discover that he was dealing with Dorothy Whitmore, and Dorothy Whitmore had been protecting valuable things from people who didn't deserve them for longer than he had been alive. We poured our hearts into researching and telling the story. If you're hooked, show some love with a subscribe. Now, where were we? 2 weeks passed in relative quiet after I refused to sign Jameson's papers. I thought perhaps he had accepted my decision, given me the space I needed to consider his proposal on my own terms. I should have known better. Jameson had never been one to accept no gracefully. The morning it all fell apart started like any other.
I was in my workshop behind the house, carefully applying gold leaf to a restored picture frame from the 1890s, when I heard car doors slamming in my driveway. Multiple car doors. Through the workshop window, I could see Jameson's silver SUV, but there were two other vehicles I didn't recognize, a moving truck and a white van with Heritage Estate Services painted on the side. My blood turned cold. Heritage Estate Services was an auction house that specialized in liquidating the belongings of elderly people who had moved to assisted living facilities. I had worked with them before when helping families sell inherited collections, but I had never called them to my house. I set down my brush and walked quickly toward the front door, my mind racing through possibilities, hoping there was some reasonable explanation for what I was seeing. But as I rounded the corner of my house, that hope died completely. Jameson was standing on my front porch with a clipboard, directing 3 workers who were already loading my mahogany dining room set onto a dolly. The same dining room set where Harold had carved our initials on our first wedding anniversary. The same table where I had served Thanksgiving dinner to my children for 30 years. "Stop!" I called out, my voice sharper than I intended. "What do you think you're doing?" Jameson turned, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker across his face. Guilt, maybe, or fear of being caught, but it was quickly replaced by that patronizing smile I had grown to despise.
"Mom, there you are," he said, walking toward me with his arms outstretched, as if he were greeting me at a family reunion. "I was looking for you. We're just getting started on the move." "What move?" I demanded, stepping back from his attempted embrace. "I never agreed to any move." "We talked about this," he said, his voice taking on that patient tone people use with confused children. "Remember? You said the house was becoming too much for you to manage. You signed the papers agreeing to relocate to Sunset Manor. It's a beautiful facility, Mom. You're going to love it there." I stared at him in disbelief. "I never signed anything. I never agreed to move anywhere, and I certainly never agreed to have strangers remove my furniture without my permission." Jameson's expression shifted slightly, a crack appearing in his careful facade. "Mom, I know this is difficult. Change is always hard at your age. But we've already paid the deposit at Sunset Manor, and the movers are here. Everything's been arranged." That was when I noticed Cassandra emerge from my house, carrying my jewelry box, the hand-carved rosewood box Harold had given me for our 10th anniversary. She had the audacity to wave at me cheerfully, as if she were helping with some benevolent family project. "Where are my legal documents?" I asked Jameson, my voice deadly calm. "Show me exactly what I supposedly signed." He fumbled with his clipboard, producing a stack of papers that I immediately recognized as forgeries. My signature had been copied from other documents, crudely, but well enough to fool someone who wasn't looking carefully. The dates were wrong, the legal language was inconsistent, and most damningly of all, the notary seal was from a jurisdiction where I had never set foot. "This is fraud," I said quietly, staring at the papers. "You forged my signature." "Mom, you're being paranoid," he said, but I could hear the panic creeping into his voice. "These are the papers you signed 2 weeks ago. You just don't remember." I looked up at my son, this man I had raised, loved, and sacrificed for, and realized that I was looking at a stranger. The child I had rocked to sleep, the teenager I had bailed out of countless mistakes, the young man I had supported through every failure, had become someone I didn't recognize. "Get off my property," I said, my voice steady and clear. "All of you. Now." "Mom, that's not how this works," Jameson replied, his patience finally fraying. "The paperwork is legal. The facility is expecting you. The movers are here to do their job." "I said, get off my property. And I said the paperwork is legal," he snapped, his mask finally slipping completely. "You can't just change your mind because you're having second thoughts. This is what's best for you, whether you understand it or not." That was the moment. That single sentence crystallized everything I needed to know about how my son saw me, how he valued my autonomy, and how far he was willing to go to get what he wanted. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. "Yes, I need to report a theft in progress at 847 Elmwood Avenue. Someone is removing my property without my permission using fraudulent documents." Jameson's eyes went wide. "Mom, hang up the phone. You're making a huge mistake." "The only mistake I made," I said, watching as the workers stopped loading my furniture, "was trusting you." The police arrived within 10 minutes, Officer Rodriguez and Officer Chen. Ironic that one of them shared a name I'd been told to avoid, but this Officer Chen was on my side. They examined Jameson's forged documents, listened to his increasingly frantic explanations, and then asked to speak with me privately. "Mrs. Whitmore, do you understand what's happening here? Did you agree to any of this?" "I understand perfectly," I replied. "My son has forged legal documents to steal my property and force me out of my home. I am 68 years old, not 98. I am competent, aware, and absolutely did not consent to any of this." Officer Chen nodded, making notes. "We'll need you to come to the station to file a formal complaint. This appears to be elder abuse and fraud." Elder abuse. The words hit like a physical blow. I had heard about such things happening to other families, read about children who took advantage of aging parents, seen the warning signs in my antique business when suspicious relatives brought in collections that clearly weren't theirs to sell. But I never imagined my own son would see me as a target rather than his mother. As the officers were loading Jameson into their patrol car, he would be released on bail later that day, but the immediate threat was over, he looked at me through the window with an expression I had never seen before. Not love, not regret, not even anger. It was calculation. He was already planning his next move. That evening, as I sat in my violated living room surrounded by the furniture that had been hastily returned by the moving company, my phone rang. It was Jameson, calling from Cassandra's apartment. "Mom," he said, his voice now completely stripped of pretense, "you have no idea what you've started. I was trying to help you, trying to protect the family assets, but if you want to play hardball, I can play hardball too." "What does that mean?" I asked.
It means I know things about your finances that you've forgotten. It means I have access to accounts you don't even remember opening. It means that one way or another, I'm going to get what's rightfully mine. I felt a chill run down my spine. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that you're not as smart as you think you are," he said, his voice cold and mechanical. "I'm talking about the fact that while you were playing with your antiques, I was learning about your business, your accounts, your investments. And I'm talking about the fact that tomorrow morning, you're going to discover exactly how much damage I can do when I put my mind to it." The line went dead. I sat there in the silence of my empty house, staring at the phone, trying to process what had just happened. My son, my own child, had just threatened me, not with physical violence, but with something potentially worse, financial destruction. For the first time in this entire ordeal, I felt genuinely afraid, not of Jameson himself, but of what he might be capable of when cornered. I had always known he was selfish, always known he was irresponsible with money, but I had never suspected he was calculating enough to plan something like this for months or even years. As I walked through my house that night, checking locks and setting my security system, I realized that everything had changed. This wasn't just about a disagreement over my living situation anymore. This wasn't just about a son who thought he knew better than his mother. This was war. And tomorrow, I would find out exactly what weapons my son had been preparing to use against me. But what Jameson didn't know, what he had never bothered to learn about me, was that I had been fighting battles long before he was born. I had survived the death of my husband, built a business from nothing, and protected my family's interests for 40 decades. If he wanted a war, he was about to discover that he had chosen the wrong opponent. Because Dorothy Whitmore didn't just restore antiques, she preserved what mattered, protected what was valuable, and, when necessary, she fought like hell for what was hers. And tomorrow, that fight would begin in earnest. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with every financial document I could find, trying to piece together what Jameson might have access to, what vulnerabilities he might exploit.
By dawn, I had a clearer picture of the battlefield, and it wasn't pretty. Over the years, in my naive trust, I had added Jameson as a co-signer on several accounts for emergencies. I had given him access to my business checking account when he helped with bookkeeping during his unemployment periods. Most damaging of all, I had made him the secondary contact on my investment portfolio. A decision that seemed practical when he was struggling financially, and I wanted him to understand how responsible money management worked. At 6 a.m., I called my bank. The automated system cheerfully informed me that my primary checking account had been accessed at 11:47 p.m. the previous night. A transfer of $47,000, nearly all my emergency fund, had been moved to an account I didn't recognize. My hand shook as I hung up the phone. Jameson hadn't been bluffing. But here's what my son had forgotten about me. I hadn't survived 43 years in business by keeping all my eggs in one basket. Every successful antique dealer learns early that diversification isn't just smart, it's survival. Jameson knew about my obvious accounts, the ones I used for daily expenses and routine business operations. He didn't know about the others. The first call I made was to my attorney, George Pemberton, who had been handling my legal affairs for over 2 decades. George had guided me through Harold's death, helped me structure my business to protect it from liability, and, most importantly, had set up several financial safeguards that I'd never mentioned to my children. Dorothy. George's voice was grim when I explained the situation. This is worse than simple elder abuse. If he's accessing accounts without authorization for theft, we're looking at federal charges. But first, we need to stop the bleeding. Within an hour, George helped me freeze every account that Jameson had accessed. We filed emergency injunctions to prevent further transfers and began the process of tracing where my money had gone. More importantly, George reminded me of the safety net we'd set up years earlier. Remember the Meridian Trust we set up after Harold died? The one that holds your most valuable antiques, your investment properties, and the bulk of your savings? Jameson was never named as a beneficiary or trustee. He has no access to those funds, and more importantly, he doesn't even know they exist. The Meridian Trust. I had almost forgotten about it myself. After Harold died, George had convinced me to place my most valuable antiques, my investment properties, and the bulk of my savings into an irrevocable trust. The stated purpose was tax protection and estate planning, but George's real motivation had been protecting me from exactly this kind of family financial abuse. "How much is in the trust?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. As of last quarter's valuation, approximately $2.3 million in assets. Your house, the commercial property where your workshop is located, your vintage car collection, and your most valuable antique pieces. Plus, the investment portfolio that's been growing for 15 years.
$2.3 million that Jameson didn't know existed. Suddenly, his theft of $47,000 felt less like a devastating blow and more like a minor inconvenience. But I wasn't ready to reveal that advantage yet. First, I needed to understand exactly what my son was planning. The second call I made was to my daughter Penelope in Denver. Unlike Jameson, Penelope had built a successful career as a forensic accountant. If anyone could help me trace financial irregularities and build a case against her brother, it would be her. "Mom, I've been worried about this for months," Penelope said when I explained the situation. "Jameson's been asking strange questions about your finances every time we talk. He wanted to know about insurance policies, investment accounts, even the value of your antique collection. I thought he was just being nosy." "Can you help me figure out what he's done and what he might do next?" I asked. "I'm already booking a flight. And Mom, we're going to nail him to the wall. What he's done isn't just theft. It's a systematic exploitation of an elderly person's trust. I've seen these cases before, and they don't end well for the perpetrator." While I waited for Penelope's arrival, I began implementing a strategy that would have made Harold proud. My late husband had been a chess player, and he taught me that the best victories come from letting your opponent think they're winning while you quietly control the board. First, I visited my local bank branch and spoke with the manager, Mrs. Patterson, who had known me for over 20 years. I explained the situation and asked her to document every interaction Jameson had with my accounts. More importantly, I arranged for any future access attempts to trigger immediate alerts to both myself and law enforcement. Mrs. Whitmore, Mrs. Patterson said, her face flushed with indignation. I can't believe your own son would do this to you. We see elder financial abuse more often than we'd like, but it's usually strangers or distant relatives, not immediate family. Next, I drove to Heritage Estate Services, the auction house that Jameson had brought to my home. The owner, Robert Blackstone, was mortified when I explained what had happened. Mrs. Whitmore, I am so sorry, he said, pulling out a thick file. Your son presented what appeared to be proper documentation. He said you were moving to assisted living and needed to liquidate your collection quickly due to financial constraints. He even had what looked like a power of attorney. I'd like to see that documentation, I said calmly. Robert handed me the forged papers, and I immediately spotted several tells that he had missed. The notary seal was from out of state, the witness signatures were in the same handwriting, and most damning of all, the date was from a day when I had been in the hospital for a routine procedure, something that could be easily verified with medical records. Mr. Blackstone, I said, handing the papers back, I'm going to need you to preserve these documents exactly as they are. They're evidence in a criminal case. But I'm also going to need you to do something else for me. I explained my plan, and Robert's eyes lit up with understanding. By the time I left his office, we had arranged something that would give me both justice and leverage over my son. The third piece of my strategy involved my antique business itself. Over the years, I had built relationships with collectors, museum curators, and dealers across the country. These weren't just business contacts, they were friends who respected my expertise and trusted my judgment. If Jameson thought he could liquidate my collection without my permission, he was about to discover how tightly knit the antique community really was. I spent the afternoon making calls, explaining the situation to key contacts, and asking them to alert me if anyone approached them about purchasing pieces from my collection. Within hours, I had created an informal network of dozens of professionals who would recognize my antiques and refuse to deal with unauthorized sellers. But the most important call I made was to Detective Martinez at the Ridgemont Falls Police Department. Detective Martinez specialized in financial crimes against elderly victims, and she had some sobering news about my case. Mrs. Whitmore, your son's theft is more sophisticated than we initially thought. He's been planning this for at least 6 months. We found evidence that he researched her financial accounts, studied elder abuse laws to find loopholes, and even consulted with a lawyer about conservatorship proceedings. Conservatorship? I asked, though I suspected I knew what that meant. He was building a case to have you declared mentally incompetent, Detective Martinez replied. If he could convince a judge that you were suffering from dementia or couldn't manage your affairs, he could have been appointed as your legal guardian with full control over your assets. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Jameson hadn't just been stealing from me, he had been systematically destroying my reputation and credibility to justify taking everything I owned. The forged papers, the fake moving arrangements, even his comments about my memory problems. It had all been part of a deliberate campaign to paint me as an incompetent elderly woman who needed his protection.
That evening, when Penelope arrived from Denver, I was ready with a complete battle plan. My daughter took one look at the evidence I had assembled and whistled low. "Mom, this is actually brilliant," she said, spreading out bank records, legal documents, and phone logs across my dining room table.
Jameson thought he was being clever, but he's left a paper trail that any prosecutor would love. And the fact that he tried to manipulate you into signing legal documents while also stealing from your accounts shows premeditation. "What's our next move?" I asked. Penelope smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like her father when he was planning a particularly satisfying chess victory. "We're going to let him think he's winning. We're going to let him believe that his theft has left you desperate and vulnerable. And then, when he makes his next move, we're going to spring a trap that will end his schemes permanently." "What kind of trap?" "The kind that uses his own greed against him," she replied. "Jameson thinks he knows everything about your finances, but he's only seen the tip of the iceberg. Tomorrow, we're going to show him exactly how wrong he is about who he's been trying to steal from." That night, for the first time since this nightmare began, I slept peacefully. Not because the danger had passed, but because I finally had a plan that would not only protect my assets, but teach my son the most important lesson of his life. Jameson had spent months underestimating me, treating me like a confused old woman who could be easily manipulated and robbed. Tomorrow, he would discover that Dorothy Whitmore wasn't just a 68-year-old antique dealer who could be pushed around. Tomorrow, he would learn that he had just declared war on someone who had been protecting valuable things from unworthy people for longer than he had been alive. And this time, the most valuable thing I was protecting was my own dignity. The trap was set for Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. Penelope and I had spent the previous day crafting the perfect bait. A carefully worded voicemail that I left on Jameson's phone, my voice trembling with just the right amount of desperation. "Jameson, it's Mom. I need to talk to you. The police froze my accounts, and I can't access any money. My attorney says I need to settle this quickly or I could lose everything. Please, can we meet? I think maybe you were right about the assisted living facility. I can't handle this stress anymore." Within 2 hours, Jameson called back, his voice practically purring with satisfaction. "Mom, I'm so sorry this has gotten so complicated. Of course I'll help you sort this out. Why don't I come over tomorrow morning and we can figure out the best way forward?" As I hung up the phone, Penelope shook her head in disgust. "He actually sounds excited that you're suffering." "Good," I replied. "Overconfident people make bigger mistakes." Tuesday morning arrived gray and drizzling, which felt oddly appropriate for what was about to unfold. Penelope positioned herself in my study with a laptop and recording equipment connected to Detective Martinez by phone. George Pemberton sat in my kitchen, reviewing legal documents. And I waited in my living room, playing the role of a defeated elderly woman contemplating surrender. Jameson arrived at exactly 10 a.m., accompanied by Cassandra and another man I didn't recognize. Tall, thin, with the predatory smile of someone who made his living off other people's misfortune. "Mom, you look tired. This whole situation has been so hard on you." "It has," I agreed, letting my voice sound fragile. "I just want it to be over." "Mom, this is my friend Derek Morrison," Jameson said, gesturing to the stranger. "He's a financial advisor who specializes in helping families navigate complex situations like ours. He's offered to help us sort out your assets and find the best solution for everyone." I nodded weakly, though internally I was cataloging everything. Derek Morrison was clearly the muscle in this operation, someone brought in to legitimize whatever scheme Jameson had planned. Cassandra carried a briefcase, which likely contained more forged documents, and Jameson himself radiated the confidence of someone who believed he had already won. "Mrs. Whitmore," Derek said, settling into my father's chair without being invited, "your son has explained your situation. Given the legal complications in your advanced age, the smartest move would be to liquidate your assets quickly and move you somewhere more manageable." "I've been thinking about what you said,"
I told Jameson, wrapping my arms around myself as if seeking comfort. About Sunset Manor. Maybe it would be easier. Jameson's eyes lit up, but he tried to maintain a concerned expression.
Not exactly, Jameson said, his mask of concern slipping slightly. Derek arranged for a holding company that I have an interest in. It simplifies the tax implications and ensures the property stays in the family. A holding company, of course. Jameson thought he was being clever, creating legal distance between himself and the theft while still getting everything he wanted. The best part, Derek added, is that we can expedite the whole process. Sign today, and you could be moved into Sunset Manor by the weekend. No more stress, no more complications. I stared at the papers, letting them think I was wavering. It's so much money involved. Are you sure this is legal? Completely legal, Derek assured me. Your son is just trying to protect the family wealth from estate taxes and legal complications. That was my cue. I looked up at Jameson with tears in my eyes. Real tears, born of genuine heartbreak at what my son had become. Before I sign anything, I need to know something. Did you really think I was that stupid? The change in the room was immediate. Jameson's false concern evaporated, replaced with wariness. Cassandra's hand froze halfway to her briefcase. Derek Morrison straightened in his chair like a predator sensing danger. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Jameson asked carefully. "I'm talking about the Meridian Trust, the one that holds $2.3 million in assets that you don't even know exists." The color drained from Jameson's face. "What trust?" "The irrevocable trust that your father and I established 15 years ago, the one that holds this house, my commercial properties, my most valuable antiques, and the investment portfolio that's been growing while you've been scheming to steal my lunch money." Penelope emerged from the study, laptop in hand. "Hello, Jameson. Surprise." "Penny?" Jameson stammered. "What are you doing here?" "Documenting elder abuse," she replied cheerfully. "I'm a forensic accountant, remember? This is literally what I do for a living." Derek Morrison was already reaching for his phone, but George Pemberton stepped into the room at that moment, his presence immediately commanding attention. "Mr. Morrison," George said pleasantly, "I'm Mrs. Whitmore's attorney. Before you make any calls, you should know that this entire conversation has been recorded, and Detective Martinez is listening on speakerphone." "Hello, everyone," came Detective Martinez's voice from Penelope's laptop speakers. "Mr. Whitmore, you're under arrest for elder abuse, fraud, and grand theft. Mr. Morrison, we'll be looking into your business practices as well." Jameson stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Cassandra had gone completely pale, clutching her briefcase of forged documents like a shield. "You set me up," Jameson finally whispered. "No," I corrected him. "You set yourself up. I just gave you enough rope to hang yourself with." "The $47,000 you stole," Penelope added, consulting her laptop, "represents less than 2% of Mom's actual assets. You committed multiple felonies to steal what amounts to pocket change." "But the accounts," Jameson protested weakly. "I had access to everything." "You had access to the accounts I let you see. The working accounts I used for daily expenses. Did you really think I'd keep my life savings in a checking account that you could access?" Derek Morrison tried to edge toward the door, but George blocked his path. "The purchase agreement you brought today? It's evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud. The holding company? We traced it back to you this morning. Very sloppy work." "This is entrapment," Cassandra said, finally finding her voice. "No," Detective Martinez's voice crackled from the speakers. "This is justice. Entrapment would be if we convinced him to commit a crime he wasn't already planning. This is just allowing him to complete the crimes he was already in the process of committing."
Jameson sank into a chair, his face buried in his hands. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. But then I remembered the months of manipulation, the forged documents, the systematic attempt to destroy my reputation and steal my life's work. "Did you really think," I asked him quietly, "that I survived 43 years in business by being the helpless old woman you wanted me to be?" He looked up at me then, and I saw something I had never seen in his eyes before: genuine fear. Not of punishment, but of the realization that he had completely misjudged his opponent. "Mom, we can work this out. It's family. We don't have to involve the police." "We didn't involve the police," Penelope said. "You did that when you committed felonies against an elderly person. The moment you forged those documents, this stopped being a family matter and became a criminal one." 2 patrol cars pulled into my driveway, their red and blue lights reflecting off my windows. Officers Rodriguez and Chen, the same officers who had responded to the initial theft, walked up to my front door. "Mrs. Whitmore," Officer Rodriguez said as I let them in, "we have arrest warrants for Jameson Whitmore and Derek Morrison. Cassandra Fleming is wanted for questioning as an accessory." As they read Jameson his rights, he looked at me one last time. "You've destroyed our family." I said, "No, you destroyed our family the moment you decided to see me as a victim instead of my mother. The moment you chose to steal from me instead of talking to me. The moment you forged my signature and tried to have me declared incompetent."
The officers led them away, Derek ranting about lawyers and Cassandra sobbing into her hands. Jameson walked silently, his shoulders slumped in defeat. After they were gone, I stood in my living room with Penelope and George, looking around at the home I had nearly lost to my son's greed. "How are you feeling, Mom?" Penelope asked gently. I considered the question carefully. How did I feel? Not victorious exactly, not happy that my son was going to prison, but for the first time in months, I felt something I had almost forgotten. "Safe," I said finally. "I feel safe in my own home again." But as I watched the police cars disappear down Elmwood Avenue, I knew this wasn't over. Jameson would be released on bail within hours. He would hire lawyers, call family members, try to spin this story as the persecution of a son who was only trying to help his aging mother. He still didn't understand who he was dealing with, but he was about to learn that Dorothy Whitmore's idea of justice was just getting started. 3 months later, I stood in courtroom 7B of the Ridgemont Falls Municipal Court, watching my son try to explain to a judge why he thought stealing from his elderly mother was an act of love. "Your Honor," Jameson's lawyer pleaded, "my client was acting out of genuine concern for his mother's welfare. Mrs. Whitmore is 68 years old, living alone in a large house filled with valuable antiques. Mr. Whitmore was simply trying to ensure her safety and security." Judge Harrison, a woman in her 60s, who had been dealing with elder abuse cases for over 20 years, was not impressed. "Counselor, are you seriously arguing that forging legal documents and stealing $47,000 constitutes concern for someone's welfare?" I sat in the front row, flanked by Penelope and George, watching this final act of a drama that had consumed the last quarter of the year. The courtroom was fuller than I had expected. Several members of my antique dealer network had come to show support. Mrs. Patterson from the bank was there to testify about the fraudulent account access. Even Robert Blackstone from Heritage Estate Services had driven up from the city to provide evidence about the attempted auction fraud. But the most powerful testimony had come from Dr. Sarah Chen, the neuropsychologist who had examined me at the court's request to determine my mental competency. Her report was unambiguous. I was not only mentally sound, but demonstrated above-average cognitive function for her age group, and showed no signs of impairment that would justify any form of conservatorship. Mrs. Whitmore, Dr. Chen had testified the day before, is one of the most mentally acute individuals I've examined this year.
The suggestion that she needed someone else to manage her affairs is not only unfounded, but frankly insulting to her intelligence. Derek Morrison had taken a plea deal 2 weeks earlier, admitting to conspiracy and agreeing to testify against Jameson in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony had been devastating. "Mr. Whitmore approached me 6 months ago," Derek had told the prosecutor. "He said his mother was sitting on valuable assets but was too stubborn to liquidate them sensibly. He wanted help creating a legal framework to force her out of her house and gain control of her property. When I suggested working with her rather than around her, he made it clear that wasn't an option." Cassandra had also plea bargained, though her lawyer had tried to paint her as an unwilling participant manipulated by Jameson. The judge hadn't bought it, especially after seeing evidence that she had been researching the value of my antique collection and had even contacted auction houses in other states about selling inherited pieces. Now it was Jameson's turn to face judgment, and his lawyer was running out of arguments. "Your Honor," the defense attorney continued, "my client has no prior criminal record. He's a father of 2 young children, and imprisoning him would cause tremendous hardship for his family." Judge Harrison consulted her notes. Mr. Whitmore also had no prior record of caring for his mother's welfare. The evidence shows that he contacted her exactly 7 times in the 6 months before this incident, each time asking about her finances or suggesting she downsize her living situation. That hurt. Even I hadn't realized how little Jameson had actually communicated with me before launching his scheme. 7 calls in 6 months, and every one of them had been reconnaissance for his theft. The prosecutor, District Attorney Rebecca Stone, stood to deliver her closing argument. "Your Honor, this case represents one of the most calculating examples of elder abuse this court has seen. The defendant didn't act impulsively or out of desperation. He spent months planning to defraud his own mother, went so far as to forge legal documents, and when confronted with his crimes, he attempted to gaslight her into believing she was mentally incompetent." D.A. Stone walked to the evidence table and picked up the forged power of attorney documents. These weren't hastily created forgeries. The defendant researched notary procedures, practiced copying my mother's signature, and created an elaborate fiction about her mental state to justify his theft. This wasn't a family dispute. It was a criminal enterprise. When Judge Harrison asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement, I stood slowly and walked to the podium. I had practiced the speech for weeks, but seeing Jameson sitting at the defendant's table, looking older, thinner, and utterly defeated, nearly made me lose my composure.
"Your Honor," I began, my voice steadier than I felt, "the man sitting in that chair is my son. I carried him for 9 months, raised him for 18 years, and supported him for 23 years after that. I paid for his education, helped him through multiple job losses, and bailed him out of financial trouble more times than I can count." I paused, looking directly at Jameson. "What hurts the most isn't the money he stole. It's that he looked at me, his mother, and saw only an obstacle to his inheritance. He saw a helpless old woman who could be manipulated and discarded, not the person who sacrificed everything to give him opportunities." Jameson's eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't finished. He tried to have me declared mentally incompetent not because I was failing, but because I was succeeding. Because at 68, I was still sharp enough to see through his lies, still strong enough to fight back, and still smart enough to protect what I had built. That wasn't evidence of my incompetence. It was evidence of his. I took a breath, steadying myself for the hardest part. I don't want my son to go to prison because I hate him. I want him to face consequences because the next elderly person he targets might not have the resources or support system to fight back. If he did this to me, his own mother, what would he do to a stranger? Judge Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore. Mr. Whitmore, please stand." Jameson rose unsteadily,
his lawyer beside him. "Mr. Whitmore," Judge Harrison said, her voice carrying the weight of years of experience with family betrayals, "you have been found guilty of elder abuse, grand theft, fraud, and conspiracy. These crimes strike at the heart of what makes a civilized society function, the trust between family members and the protection of our most vulnerable citizens." She consulted her sentencing guidelines. "I sentence you to 4 years in state prison with the possibility of parole after 18 months. You will also pay full restitution to your mother, including the $47,000 stolen, plus interest and legal fees, totaling $73,000. 4 years. I felt a complex mix of relief and sadness. Relief that justice had been served, sadness that it had come to this. Additionally, Judge Harrison continued, "You are prohibited from contacting your mother directly or indirectly for a period of 5 years following your release. Any inheritance or family financial matters must be handled through court-appointed mediators." As the bailiff led Jameson away, he turned to look at me one last time. His lips moved silently, and I think he said, "I'm sorry," but I couldn't be sure. 6 months later, I sat in my garden on a warm spring morning, tending to the roses Harold had planted 30 years ago. The house felt peaceful again, no longer like a fortress under siege, but like the home it had always been meant to be. Penelope had stayed in Ridgemont Falls for 3 months after the trial, helping me reorganize my security systems and financial safeguards. She'd also helped me establish a foundation focused on educating elderly people about financial abuse and providing legal assistance to victims. "You know," she had said before returning to Denver, "what Jameson did was horrible, but your response was inspiring. You turned being targeted into becoming a protector for other people." The Whitmore Foundation for Elder Financial Protection had funded legal assistance for 12 families in its first 6 months. Each case reminded me that I had been lucky. Lucky to have resources, lucky to have Penelope's expertise, lucky to have George's legal guidance. Many elderly victims of financial abuse had none of those advantages. My phone rang, interrupting my gardening. It was George, calling with news about Jameson. He's been a model prisoner. He's participating in therapy programs and has asked the prison chaplain to help him write you a letter. "I'm not ready for letters," I said honestly. "Maybe someday, but not yet." "I understand," George replied. "But Dorothy, I want you to know something. What you did, standing up to him, fighting back, protecting yourself, it took incredible courage. A lot of people in your situation would have just given in." After I hung up, I sat back in my garden chair and looked at my house, my roses, my life that I had fought so hard to protect. Jameson had been right about one thing. I was 68 years old, but he had been wrong about everything else. Being 68 didn't make me helpless. It made me experienced. It didn't make me confused. It made me wise. It didn't make me vulnerable. It made me dangerous to anyone who underestimated me. That evening, I called Heritage Estate Services. Robert Blackstone had been after me for months to consider a legitimate sale of some of my less personal pieces. Not because I needed the money, but because certain antiques belonged in museums where they could be properly appreciated. "Mrs. Whitmore," Robert said excitedly, "I have 3 museums interested in your Civil War collection. The pricing would be, well, let's just say it would fund your foundation for the next decade." I smiled, thinking about the irony. Jameson had tried to steal my collection to fund his own comfort. Instead, I would sell pieces voluntarily to fund protection for other elderly people facing what I had faced. "Set up the meetings," I told Robert, "but with one condition. Any sale must include a plaque acknowledging that these pieces were donated by someone who believes that protecting our elders is as important as preserving our history."
As I hung up the phone and prepared for bed, I realized that Jameson had taught me something valuable, though not what he intended. He had taught me that trust, once broken, could be rebuilt. Not with the person who broke it, but within yourself. I had trusted my son, and he had betrayed that trust in the cruelest way possible. But I had also trusted my own judgment, my own strength, and my own worth. And that trust had been proven absolutely justified. At 68, I had learned that the most important person to trust is yourself. And when you do that, no one, not even your own child, can steal what truly matters. Some lessons are worth learning, even when they come at the highest possible price.